Hello once again, and welcome to another fine edition of the Brattlecast. This is Jordan Rich, along with my good friend Ken Gloss from the very famous Brattle bookshop in Boston. I say famous, it's on movie screens everywhere. More on that later at another podcast, perhaps. But the Brattlecast today is focusing on a particular book you brought in that has a great story attached to it.
Well, we recently got called in by a colleague of ours to buy a collection together, and they wanted some of the books, we wanted some of the books. And there were first editions, older books. There were some very nice things. We finally negotiated between ourselves and negotiated with the person, got the books, and I said, well, there's one book we have to have. Okay. And at first, the other colleague wasn't quite sure why I was so emphatic, because it wasn't necessarily one of the more valuable or high-priced. But it's a little book, a small one, and it's called Famous Old People, which is nice. Mm-hmm. It was written by Nathanial Hawthorne.
That makes it nice.
Well, that makes it nice. It's the first edition. Yeah. It was done in Boston in 1841, and it's done by Elizabeth Peabody. The next line on the title page, though, is what really got me, although I knew, but still, 13 West Street in Boston.
Let me see. That's not too far from where you may be on West Street.
Well, considering we're in 911 West Street, 13 would be the next building to us.
Absolutely. Wow.
And, you know, it makes you think, well, first of all, this is a good book. It was in good condition. There was a book plate in it that a lot of people wouldn't recognize, but it's a book plate very nicely engraved by a man named A. Edward Newton, who in the 30s, 40s, 50s was one of the more famous book collectors in the United States. Now, as generations go on, as time goes on, the people who say, wow, this was his copy, are less and less and less. Right. But when I stop and think about that, next door to us, there's a little plaque on the building that says Peabody Bookstore. And it was during the mid-1800s, and it was one of the centers for the transcendental movement. So this woman, Elizabeth Peabody, who wasn't married, but she essentially had a salon there. And she printed books, she published books, she had the bookstore. But the people who came were like Emerson, Thoreau, all of the major authors, Whittier, Longfellow. Now, one of the particularly nice things about Hawthorne started showing up there more often. There were 3 Peabody sisters, and one of them Hawthorne found very attractive, which is maybe why he kept showing up. Now, Hawthorne in and of himself was a strange character, a great writer. He actually even wrote a book about Franklin Pierce. It was a campaign biography. They had them back then. After the campaign and Pierce won, he got a job, but he also married Elizabeth Peabody's sister.
One question that comes to mind, only because I'm familiar with local history, Peabody is a very well-known Massachusetts family name.
Yeah.
Was she connected to any of the political people?
She was connected, but in much more of a distance.
Okay.
The Peabodys were also a very rich family, which is why towns were named after them, libraries, museums, and on and on. But, yeah, she was connected, but not a major part of that. But she was also one of the reasons you can have a literary bookstore and have a salon and manage that is that, yes, there was money in the family that would help support you to do that. And maybe even why Elizabeth didn't have to get married necessarily.
Exactly. She had a pretty good
Yeah.
dowry, but she held on to it. So what year is this
This
book
was
created?
1841.
Wow.
But what it does for me is I look at this, and I know some of the history, but I still sort of, every once in a while when I'm walking to the store early in the morning or maybe in the evening or maybe when our store is closed, or even once in a while when I walk by it's really crowded, and I'm looking at all the people in our outside lot, all the people buying the books, and I'm thinking about, well, now it's getting to be close to 200 years ago, but 150 in any case, that there was a whole other literary crowd there. And wouldn't it be fascinating to stand there and watch these people walk in and out of the the bookstore then, and maybe attend some of the salons. And the building right now is empty, and I don't know whether their ghosts get together at night or not, which would make a nice story in and of itself. But the literary tradition, the West Street, many people don't realize it, but there is a very long history in Boston. It was probably much stronger then when Boston was a publishing center and all of the people came. But I can just sort of half in my mind looking at this book, and one of the reasons I love it is I can almost touch it and transport myself back to that era and wonder who walked by our store, what if we were there complimenting them at the time. Of course, they'd be a little strange selling books from the 1970s, 1940s, 2000. That would really probably set them off.
That would freak them out a little bit. No, it's very interesting because when you live in Boston, as both of us do, and you just walk the streets and you kind of look up occasionally at some of the architecture and you realize these buildings as yours is, are decades, if not centuries old.
Yeah.
And there's so much history. And you mentioned the Transcendental movement. That was a very popular and strong movement back then. And I didn't realize it had so much to do with this city that we're in.
Well, not only did it have it was sort of the back to nature and Boston was the center of it with people like Thoreau,
Right.
Emerson, and then it also one of the other sisters married Horace Mann, who was beginnings of the public education system in the United States. And like I say, that's one of the reasons that sometimes getting an old book like this, touching it, holding it, why people will buy it and collect is it brings them back and brings back that feeling of what was doing and maybe ideas that they liked. In some cases, maybe ideas they didn't totally agree with. But when you get into it, you sort of wish there was a time machine to go along with it. And by the way, we just bought a bunch of H.G. Wells books, too, in a first edition of the Time Machine.
What I love about this is it's always great to see the glint in your eye when you see something that you want, that you find desirable.
I find it desirable. It's something that I will sell, hopefully, to somebody who really wants it. What my great idea of possession of books is not necessarily to keep and hold them, but to get them and pass them on, and then I get the next one, and then I get the next one, and I get the stories that go with them, and that I can express them and tell people about it. So come to the Brattle Bookshop. If you hear this podcast, I can point out the plaque next door to us, and you can get into a whole other literary group.
I think you've invited a lot of people to do just that. Great of you to do so. Don't forget, you can go to brattlebookshop.com to find out so much more and join us on future Brattlecasts, which are always exciting and fun. Thank you, my friend.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and I'll hold this book while I'm going back and see whether any of them meet me here. Meet me when I get back.
Okay.